You know that feeling? Like you're on a treadmill, running faster and faster, but getting absolutely nowhere. That feeling that you're always working harder just to fall a little bit farther behind. Well, it's not just in your head, it's very real. And as we're about to see, that feeling is plugged directly into the very design of our global financial system. So, let's get into it. It all starts with a number that's so big it kind of short circuits your brain. $315 trillion. That is the total weight of all the debt in the world. To put that in perspective, it's more than 3 times the size of the entire global economy. Every single government on planet Earth is in debt. And that brings us to a really weird, almost chilling question, right? If every single country owes money, who exactly do they owe it to? It's not like we're borrowing from Mars. The answer is the debt is owed to a system that wasn't an accident. It was built on purpose. Yeah, this whole debt trap was engineered piece by piece over the last 300 years by 4 specific people. And today, we're going to break down who they were and look at the 4 key innovations they came up with to build the financial world that you and I are living in right now. So our story kicks off way back in 1694 in England with a Scottish banker named William Paterson. Now, this guy didn't invent lending or debt. No, he invented something way more powerful, a totally new kind of debt. He called it permanent debt. So here's the absolute key to understanding this. Before Paterson, if a government took out a loan, it was just like your car loan. It was supposed to be paid back. But his big revolutionary idea, the one he used to create the Bank of England, was for a loan where the main part, the principal, is never repaid. The government just pays the interest forever and ever using your tax money. And this just completely flips the script. The whole world went from seeing debt as a temporary problem you had to solve to debt becoming a permanent money-making feature of the government itself. You see, for the lenders, the risk just vanished. Their interest payments were now backed by the full power of the government to tax its citizens. The first gear of this massive trap was now locked in place. All right, let's jump forward to our second architect. A century after Paterson, a man named Nathan Rothschild took this idea of permanent debt and basically put it on steroids. He's the guy who made the debt trap not just permanent, but completely inescapable. So this was Rothschild's playbook, and it was genius. He didn't just lend to one government. No, he would buy up huge piles of their bonds, and then he'd create a whole marketplace where other people could buy and sell them. He was a master of using information, like he famously did after the Battle of Waterloo, to play the market. But his real masterstroke was weaving these debts across borders, selling, say, British debt to investors in France. And here's why that was such a game changer. Suddenly, a bond from the British government might be owned by a banker in Paris, who then used that bond as collateral for a loan from another bank in Vienna. The web got so tangled that if any single country decided to default, it would set off a massive chain reaction, and the entire international house of cards could come tumbling down. Just like that, default was no longer an option. Okay, so by the early 1900s, the trap is permanent and it's inescapable. But there was still a natural limit, right? A government could only borrow what people were willing to lend it. Well, our third architect, J.P. Morgan, came up with a way to remove that limit entirely, making debt, for all practical purposes, infinite. So after a financial crisis in 1907, Morgan had to personally bail out the U.S. financial system. After that, he got all the most powerful bankers together for a top-secret meeting on a private island called Jekyll Island. Why was it so secret? Well, this quote really says it all. They knew that if the American public found out that a small group of private bankers were literally designing the nation's money system to benefit themselves, people would lose their minds. And the result of that secret meeting was the Federal Reserve. It was brilliantly marketed to look like a public, government thing, but it's really a quasi-private company owned by its member banks. And it was given the ultimate superpower, the ability to create money out of thin air to buy government bonds. This meant the U.S. government now had a guaranteed customer with a bottomless wallet. From that point on, the government could borrow pretty much without limit. So now debt is permanent, it's inescapable, and it's infinite. But there was one last little loophole. What happens if a country just flat out runs out of money and literally can't pay? Our final architect, Fed Chairman Paul Volcker, slammed that escape hatch shut in 1982, and that's what made the trap truly global.
Okay, so here's how it all went down. In the 70s, a bunch of developing countries borrowed billions of US dollars. But then, to fight inflation back home, Volcker jacked up interest rates to insane levels. For those borrowing nations, this was like a wrecking ball. Their interest payments went through the roof overnight. By August of '82, Mexico was about to default, which could have started a domino effect and taken down some of the world's biggest banks. But Volcker and the IMF didn't let Mexico fail. And this was the final, brilliant piece of the trap. When a country goes broke, you don't forgive their debt. Oh no. Instead, you have the IMF give them new loans, just enough to make the interest payments on their old loans. But there's a catch. In exchange for this bailout, the country has to hand over control of its economic policy. Default gets replaced with permanent, managed bankruptcy. So let's put all these pieces together. These four innovations, stacked one on top of the other over 300 years, they've built the entire financial world that we live in and that governs our lives today. So let's just recap real quick. Patterson made debt a permanent part of government. Rothschild wove it into a global web you couldn't escape from. Morgan gave the government an infinite checkbook with a central bank. And finally, Volcker created a system to make sure that no country could ever truly leave the game. The trap is complete.
Which brings us right back to that first question. Who is all this money owed to? Well, if we look at the US, it's a mix. A lot is owned by the public through things like pension funds and retirement accounts, and a whole lot is owned by the government itself in a sort of weird accounting loop. But the really important question isn't just who owns the debt, it's who's getting rich off the interest. And here's the bottom line. This whole system is designed to be a giant, quiet, nonstop vacuum, sucking wealth upwards. Your tax dollars go to the government, which then pays out hundreds of billions of dollars a year in interest, mostly to the big banks and financial institutions that hold all that debt. It's a constant drain from people who work for a living to the financial sector. This is the engine that creates that feeling of always being one step behind.
So the obvious common sense question here is, okay, if this debt is the problem, why in the world don't we just get serious and pay it all off? Why not just stop borrowing and wipe the slate clean? And here it is. This is the most profound, most disturbing secret of the whole system. We can't pay it off. Because in our modern economy, most of our money is actually created when debt is created. If we were to actually pay off the national debt, the money supply itself would basically evaporate. It would trigger a massive deflationary collapse that would bring down the entire global economy. The system is designed so that the debt can never, ever be repaid.
And that leaves us with a pretty startling realization. This mountain of debt that's always growing and impossible to escape, it isn't a flaw in the system, it is the system. It's the central feature, not some bug that needs to be fixed. Which forces us to ask one last really critical question. After 300 years of this system working exactly as it was designed, what happens to all of us if that core feature finally breaks?